another victorious weekend for Nebraska as we welcome you in to the Route Husker Football Podcast Edition. I'm by myself. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not by myself today. I am joined by a very esteemed colleague, former colleague, I should say, still a good buddy of mine, big baseball fan. This guy is something else, first of all. Let me just say that. His name is Michael Dixon. He does some announcing for 90.3 KRNU, part of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. But he is more importantly known for his brilliant work at the student newspaper. It is called the DailyNebraskan. And Michael, first of all, great to have you on, buddy. And I'm sorry that you're a Mariners fan, correct? Because I get confused.
Yep.
Yeah, I am just so sorry that this year did not pan out that World Series greatness that we all thought would happen, that we all everybody but me predicted in late March. You know,
today I was thinking about this yesterday. The season in general has been one of the more fascinating regular seasons that I can remember. Mm-hmm. When you've got the Mets going to the postseason for the first time since 2006. Your Cubs are there for the first time since 2008. Mm-hmm. The Blue Jays are there for the first time since they won the World Series in 1993.
Since the year I was born.
Which is fascinating. As long as these playoff droughts have been, they're coming to an end. Of course, last year you had the Royals in their playoff drought after 29 years, I believe. And now the Mariners claim to fame after a year in which they were supposed to win the American League West, potentially win the American League, and then challenge for a World Series title is the fact that they are going to be they're going to have the longest active playoff drought. It is going on 14 years after this year, and hoping it doesn't push to 15 next year. But it has been since 2001 since they have been to the playoffs. But that being said, it's been a fascinating baseball season, and I don't think a lot of people could have predicted exactly everything that we've seen.
The Texas Rangers and the Houston Astros are the top two teams in the AL West.
And I remember sitting in Surprise, Arizona, thinking the Rangers were probably, during spring training, thinking the Rangers were probably a 100-loss team, or at least something around it.
I predicted them to finish last.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people did too.
I predicted the Astros to finish second to last.
Fourth, and then you've got the Angels, you've got the A's and the Mariners, and it's just awful. It's just awful.
I just distinctly remember Amsley Sinkmile, when I was hosting the layoff game, listing 8 reasons why the Astros can win the AL West. And one of them was, why not? And she just said that just so bubbly and cheerfully, why not? And now here we are. It's like, well, they might not win the West, but they probably are going to go to the postseason. That's for sure.
I'll tell you that the Mariners are doing their best to make sure the Astros do not get in the postseason, wild card races. And if you have some time, Swanee, I would love for you to go read, I believe it's Jason Stark's piece on ESPN about the tiebreaker situations and just how disastrous they can get. Because you're not talking about just a tiebreak in the wild card. You're also talking about tiebreakers in the top of divisions, and then they've got to play games, and it's just a disaster.
Home field advantage and all that. Yeah, just absolutely incredible.
Just a disaster.
Speaking of disasters, what a perfect segue into Nebraska Cornhusker football. They won. They're back to 500. That's really uncomfortable to be saying, I guess. But here we are. Nebraska's going into a game this weekend, once again, in which the opposing team's record is better than theirs. And that's 3 weekends in a row now in which that has happened. And I don't remember the last time that's happened this early in the season. Of course, yes, it did happen in years past, especially during the Bill Callahan years. But this is it. It's just like, first, before we go into Nebraska, Illinois, let's take a look at Saturday's game. Nebraska beating Southern Miss, escaping, if you want to call it that. Another late rally, this time by the opposing team. 36-28. Huskers in this game with 242 yards on the ground, 368 yards in the air. Well-balanced offensive attack. Just spot on. But Southern Miss with 447 yards in the air with 11 rushing yards. That's, Bo Pelini's even. Pretty much. 610 overall yards for Nebraska offensively, 458 for Southern Miss. I don't even know where to go from there. 3 Huskers with plus 50 yards on the ground. Terrell Newby, 76. Tommy Armstrong Jr., 63. Andy Janovich in that good old dead position known as fullback, coming alive once again yesterday. 68 yards on the ground for Janovich. What a great game he had. Tommy Armstrong, 23 of 35. Good numbers. 1 interception, 2 touchdowns, 368. And the receiving, Jordan Westerkamp, 11 receptions, 100+. Brandon Riley, 3 receptions, 100+. And yet Nebraska, Michael, again, just cannot figure out the penalties and the secondary. And with those penalties, as you heard us talk about last week, 3 out of the 4 games, 12 penalties in 3 of those 4 games. 2 games in a row now with 12 penalties. And somehow this time, Nebraska wins despite the 12 penalties. And we'll get to the defense in a little bit, but I mean, this is the penalties. I think, at least for me, are far worse than a Bo Pelini coached football team. Now, granted, yes, it's still early. I understand that, but this is not a new team. These are not freshmen and sophomores with a couple of juniors and a very sparse group of seniors. This is an experienced football team on both sides of the football, and yet 3 of the 4 games, 12 penalties in each of those 3 of the 4 games. It doesn't make any sense. I can't fully understand what's going on, what's going wrong, what needs to be changed, if what Mike Riley and his coaching staff are implementing that is that difficult, but I don't get it, Michael. I can't understand it.
I don't know if I have an answer for you in terms of the penalties, because it's just undisciplined stuff. Mm-hmm. And that is something that, of course, the coaching staff has to reiterate time and time again. Stop committing these stupid penalties, because really sometimes penalties are almost like, it seems like sometimes they're like turnovers, mm-hmm. like yesterday. And I know this was a ticky-tack call, but that pass interference call, I don't remember who the defensive back was.
Josh Kalu.
And in that corner, he didn't do a whole lot, but there was enough contact there to get that flag. Mm-hmm. And that was on a 4th down, deep in their own territory. And had that flag not been thrown, they probably would have escaped without Southern Miss having the ball, mm-hmm. the chance to tie at the end. But mm-hmm. still, it's that kind of thing. Those kind of plays follow Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter where they are on the field. Those kind of things just happen. And right there, instead of a 4th down, instead of forcing a Southern Miss turnover on downs, you give them another chance to get in the end zone, and I think they do right after that. So it's something that the coaching staff has to reiterate time and time again. Stop committing these dumb penalties. But I don't know how they're doing it. Obviously, they're trying to, because they know it's a problem. But one thing that troubles me is that I attend practice 2 times a week, mm-hmm. and it seems like every single time, no matter who's talking, they're talking about how well they're practicing. It's the same message time and time again. Riley mm-hmm. says that I think we had a very, very good week of practice. We did a very good job. We were well prepared, and yet they're well prepared and lose against BYU. They're well prepared and lose against Miami. And I know mm-hmm. they came back in that game, but still they had no business really being in that position in the first place with as poorly as they played the first 3 quarters. And then they say they're well prepared going into Southern Miss, and yet you give up 450 passing yards. Yeah. And Southern Miss should never have the ball with a chance to tie late in that game. It reminded me very much of Wyoming in 2013.
Yes.
Where the game looks to be put to bed, and they just keep giving Southern Miss or Wyoming, in that sense, a chance to keep themselves in the game. And,
That's right.
There's a very slim chance that they could have won the game at the end, but the fact of the matter is it's a win that almost feels like a loss.
I thought yesterday felt like McNeese State.
Yeah, very
with
much so.
A play, and Amir Abdullah's touchdown wasn't a game-ending game winner. It was, with 20 seconds left or however much time was left, less than 30. And yesterday, Southern Miss racing down the field, have a chance for a Hail Mary, and out of nowhere, here comes Frida Makin-Mullendoon, and boom, blasts Southern Miss's quarterback, Nick Mullins. Game over right there. What a great note to end on, kind of like McNeese State. Nebraska escapes. And it's like, we can't keep doing this. You can't. You're not supposed to.
No, and it's going to be if they keep playing the way they do, I even have a tough time seeing 6-6. I'm starting to think 5-7 because it's not like 2013 where it seemed like early on they struggled, but they found it at a certain point. It's like you're waiting for these guys to figure it out, and they're not. And you're 4 games into the season. I know it's only 4 games, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a third of the way. You're a third of the way through with the season.
Yeah,
and you're still struggling with the same things week after week. And at a certain point, what makes you think it's going to get any better? And I personally can't see much of an indication that it's going to get better. Offensively, they're fine. They are more than fine. Armstrong looks pretty darn good in some situations.
Absolutely.
Westerkamp, he may not drop a ball for the rest of his life.
He should be getting targeted way more than he is right now.
And he had a big game yesterday.
Yes.
Brandon Riley's been very solid.
Another guy who should be targeted more.
Yeah, there's
another guy
Stanley
should be targeted
Morgan.
more.
I mean, they've got, it's like an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver right now.
Everybody was so concerned with DeMore Pearson-L getting hurt. It's like,
and
folks,
it's like it
that's
almost
the
doesn't matter.
special teams
Exactly.
game, really.
It's almost like it does not matter. And of course, it never hurts to have a kid like DeMore back.
Oh, of course not.
Receiving kickoffs.
It just
punts,
helps the special teams aspect even more.
Exactly.
And it's already fine right now as it is.
And offensively, Pearson-L's absence, quite frankly, hasn't made any difference because these guys have been so darn good, and Armstrong's looked pretty solid.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, Newby, he hasn't been getting the ball a whole lot, and at running back, it seems like they're still – it's not that they're trying to figure out exactly what they want to do, but they're still having a difficult time piecing it together.
Yeah.
But then again, like yesterday, you got a guy like Andy Janovich pop out. He had 3 carries for 6 yards in his entire Nebraska career in 4 years, basically 3 years, 3 1/3 years, if you will.
Yeah.
This is his senior year. And he runs for 68 yards yesterday and catches a pass for 53 yards. 121 all-purpose yards from Mr. Andy Janovich. And those are the kind of things that offensively, they're okay. They've got pieces. But defensively, it is an absolute mess. And quite frankly, I am shocked that Southern Miss did not try to exploit that secondary more than they did.
Yeah.
In that first half.
Well, 447 yards, that's a pretty good chunk. I don't know how much more you can do damage-wise against the secondary.
In that first half, especially in that first quarter, it was like they kept trying to get that non-existent running game going, and it never got going. And at a certain point, they found themselves down 22-0, and they were not moving the ball a whole lot. And you think, okay, Nebraska's fine, and then the second half they start throwing a lot more, and it's like time and time again they're getting beat over the top, they're getting beat over the middle, they're getting beat on those short routes, they're getting beat on those back shoulder throws. It doesn't matter how it's coming. It's just that the passing game is coming, and now you've got a Nebraska defense that ranks dead last in average.
It's shocking. And honestly, I don't even think that's a front seven problem. And here, everybody was all concerned, linebackers are going to be terrible. It's so thin. Chris Webber had 12 tackles yesterday.
And
two tackles for a loss.
And that's a walk-on doing that, too. And linebacker and at the defensive line, I don't think it's much of a problem, but it's those guys in the secondary.
It's the secondary.
It's unbelievable.
By the way, Malik Collins, nowhere to be found yesterday. No tackles at all. The only reason he shows up on the stat sheet is because he had one QB hurry. But again, Nebraska, 8 tackles for a loss, 4 sacks. Freedom Akinmoladun. Nebraska Freedom is here, and it is awesome because that guy is just, I mean, man, you put Jack Anglish back, you bring him back when he gets healthy, it's going to be like, man, how are you going to find time for him or for Freedom, because both of them are just so explosive. You've got 5 for sure starter-worthy defensive linemen now that one of them can't be brought out there because they're not doing anything, or because they're doing too much. And it's just a crowded field, and it's like, well, can one of you guys play secondary? Because it's to that point
exactly.
where
Just put anyone in there.
You took out Mike Riley, takes out Daniel Davey. He inserts Josh Kalu. He starts Jonathan Rose. So now we've got 2 different guys at the starting spot for corners. You still have Nate Gary. You still have no, Nate Gary did not start.
No, Nate Gary had
That's
one
right.
of the worst games of his. It may have been the worst game of his Nebraska career. So he was clueless from the opening kickoff.
Yeah,
and that to me is a problem.
Yeah, pretty much not even there. And I'm trying to find who else was back there in the secondary. It was, I know Byerson Cockrell had a great game, but the point is, oh, there's Nate Gary. I missed him. But yeah, it's like like Gary, Collins, non-existent. But the secondary is just like, can we get somebody to do something back there?
And it's just that.
It's the problems that are with Nebraska. Summarizing all of this up here, it's just 2 things. If you think about it, it's penalties and the defensive passing game.
Yep.
It's just those 2 things, which is kind of like, well, that sounds a little bit like a Bo Pelini thing. And everybody who wanted Bo Pelini gone said, well, we need to get him out of here because then we'll change that. And it's like, have we changed it at all, or has it gotten worse? Because I honestly think it's gotten worse. I tell you, if Bo Pelini had coached that game against Southern Miss, probably would have been a blowout. Probably would have been an absolute just smear them all over the field. Miami, though, who knows if
probably
that probably
a
would
similar
have been a blowout
outcome.
too. Or yeah, it could have been that as well. But it's just like 2 simple things that you need to fix, and this team. Now, granted, yes, Nebraska's literally 2 plays different from being 4-0.
It's the way that they've
exactly.
lost. They're not. They may be, if they're 4-0, you're still sitting there telling yourself these guys don't necessarily, they don't pass the eye test. And one of the more concerning outcomes in my mind yesterday for Nebraska was Michigan 31, BYU nothing.
Yes,
that was. Nebraska was nowhere. I don't think you could make the argument. Yes, they lost on a Hail Mary, but I do not think you can make the argument that they were the better team in that game. And BYU goes to Michigan. Granted, BYU's on the tail end of a nightmare 4-game run, and they play a very difficult schedule nonetheless. So they're not fazed by tough games at Nebraska or at Michigan, but still, they lose 31-0 while you've got Nebraska, who lost to BYU, struggling against Southern Miss. And Southern Miss, yeah, they're better, but no matter what they are now, they should never have the ball with a chance to tie in Memorial Stadium. It should not happen, and it did yesterday. And however slim the chances were, they were still there. And that, to me, is a problem. And looking forward, if you're looking at Illinois, it's, at least Nebraska has Illinois to start Big Ten play. They can get on. But is there any given with these guys so far? And on top of that, they may have Illinois, but look at the 4 games they have left at home. You've got Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Iowa. Do you see the way they played yesterday? They lose those 4 games.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you got a couple more road games at Minnesota. Do they win that game? Granted, they're not going to. I mean, I don't think they'll lose all of those, but still,
Rutgers and Purdue are both dumpster fires now.
Yeah, they should win. They should win at Purdue. They should win at Rutgers. Quite frankly, they should win at Illinois. But those other 5 games, I don't. you can't say they should do anything in those. And that to me is concerning, because now you're looking under that point of view, you're looking at 5-7, which is.
And we all here I'm thinking, and you weren't here for this, but I said at the beginning of this year when we had our first Husker football podcast, season preview with Devin Cleach and Brent Bonfleur, I said I cannot see a way that this Nebraska team goes anything less than 8-4. And now here we are, we're saying it might be a possible miracle if they go 8-4.
Oh, I think it would be more than a possible miracle.
Well,
they would have to turn things around in a hurry.
Exactly. And it's just like, nobody saw a Hail Mary by BYU. Nobody saw the way the Miami game transpired, and nobody saw that. So it's just the way these things have happened. It's like it's those people out there saying, well, I said Nebraska would end up being... No, you didn't. You didn't see this outcome happening. Nobody saw 12 penalties in 3 of Nebraska's 4 games.
I'm right. I'm right there with you, because I thought they would struggle, just based on the premise that you've got Riley trying to use Pelini's guys to incorporate his system. But even then, I think I said 8-5 with a loss in the bowl game, or maybe a win in the bowl game. It doesn't really matter. 8-5 was my record, and that's not a great year by any means. But to see the way it's all happened, it's been pretty eye-opening, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. Nebraska taking on Illinois this weekend in Champaign. I mean, right now, it's just like Nebraska offensively is doing so well. They're averaging over 500 yards of offense, but they're giving up almost 450 yards of offense. It's like, should there be a concern going into this weekend? Because I honestly think there should be. If you have secondary problems again, in all 4 games, there's secondary problems, and 3 of the 4 games, there are some sort of penalty issues. If you can't fix those, I would not be putting the money on Nebraska this weekend in any way, shape, or form, because you cannot, and I said this last week, you cannot expect to win a football game if you've got 12 penalties. You can't. And 2 of the 3 times it's happened in Nebraska, it's been totally kaput. So I don't know what to expect this week for Nebraska going into Champaign against Illinois, a place they have never played at yet in the Big Ten Conference. So I don't know. Yeah,
I honestly, I think they'll win. I do think they will win. But I think it's very dangerous to hear people say it's Illinois, because Nebraska can't think that. They are not good enough to think that. They're not Ohio State. They're not Michigan State. They're not Wisconsin at this point. They cannot afford to just play off these road games against these opponents, because their road schedule is terrible. I mean, their road schedule at Illinois, at Purdue, at Rutgers, and
at Minnesota.
Okay, so at Minnesota, yeah, that's little bit better.
The only dangerous game.
But other than that, I mean, those 3 games you should definitely win, but they cannot afford to think that, because if they start thinking that, they're going to lose. They're going to lose more than one of those games, and then you're starting to look at 5-7, 6-6, 4-8. Maybe not that bad, but this is the way that this season has transpired has been fascinating, and
almost
you cannot
unpredictable.
Exactly. You can't go into Champaign and think, oh, this is easy. You just cannot do it.
No. And the thing too is you can have a bad secondary and still win games. Look at Texas Tech and TCU.
Yeah, those 2 teams don't play defense.
Yeah.
But
you can't have 12 penalties and expect to win.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
I think when in terms of Tech and TCU, I think their offenses are as good as the Nebraska offense has been. I think Tech and TCU, naturally the Big 12, all those schools, they have great offenses and they just don't play defense, right? It's a very fun. I miss my Big 12 conference, because it's just fun. Like the teams just score a zillion points, especially nowadays. But I don't think Nebraska's offense is quite where Tech and TCU's is. In fact, I don't think it's anywhere near where Tech and TCU's is.
Yeah.
But Nebraska can't afford. Those teams can afford to not play defense. Nebraska can't really afford to not play defense because you saw what happened against Miami. I mean, it's an absolute miracle that they got that game to overtime. But yeah, I don't know, and I think they'll win. They should win. They should beat Illinois, but I just don't know. I can't really sit there and say that with any confidence.
Yeah, definitely. Before we let you go, how about Northwestern and Michigan, man?
It's impressive, and it makes the Big Ten. Yesterday was a fascinating development in the Big Ten because I have thought Michigan State, yeah, they beat Oregon, but I thought that outside of that game, they have not looked particularly good.
Dominant.
Right?
They have not looked dominant.
And then Michigan, after losing in week 1 at Utah, has turned around. They've played a very difficult
loss.
Exactly. They played a very difficult non-conference schedule, and they shut out BYU. They beat the crap out of Oregon State, and of course, Oregon State. It's the fact that you're playing teams that Southern Miss or South Alabama.
Exactly.
Michigan's playing a very difficult non-conference schedule. They look great, and Utah beats the ever-living snot out of Oregon last night
in Eugene.
That may have been the most shocking result of maybe the most shocking result of 2015 so far to see Oregon.
Yes.
I know Oregon hasn't looked fantastic, but Oregon getting beat like that at home.
20 points. Oregon, 20
and
points.
giving up 62 or 63 or whatever it was.
62.
Unbelievable. And that result makes you look at the Big Ten a little bit differently. And Northwestern's impressive. What they've done, they have not been winning. What they have done has not been pretty. But let's say they beat Stanford at home on the opening week, and then Stanford turns around and beats USC last weekend. Those kind of results
starts to legitimize things.
And then you've got Minnesota has not looked. Talk about a team that has been very, very, very unimpressive. Minnesota has just looked.
At least offensively.
Offensively, they cannot move the ball. Defensively, they've
Minnesota
been all right.
is very dangerous. But yeah, offensively, no.
And Minnesota's getting. Minnesota, it's like they're surviving from week to week after that, playing TCU pretty well in that opening. In
2 years in a row now.
Exactly, yeah. But it's just the West is turning wild.
It's weird.
It's the wild West.
Is.
To not be cliche, but it is fascinating.
It's weird too. You've got Iowa,
and Iowa scored the
4-0.
most points in Kirk Ferentz's time. As much as you're calling for Kirk Ferentz's head there in Iowa City, they turned around and they scored as many points as they ever had under the guy.
Makes no sense too. And by the way, even funnier with Michigan doing it with a former Iowa quarterback. So I mean,
Jake Rudock being the starter in Michigan or in Ann Arbor is hilarious.
It's just
hilarious.
How great is that though for Jim Harbaugh to have him there? He knows the landscape.
Yeah.
He knows what he needs to do.
But you look at the two. I like to think that Michigan and Nebraska are about the same in terms of the national perception. But for whatever reason, this year has really troubled me in terms of looking at that because you have those two are two of the big programs that went through coaching changes in the offseason. And of course, Nebraska settles for little-known Riley from Corvallis, and Michigan gets to go after the big dude in Harbaugh.
Our guy. Our
Michigan man, exactly. Yeah. And Harbaugh is starting to look as each week passes like a darn good hire.
That Ohio State game at the end of the season.
That's going to be fun. And that game's always close. Yeah, but under Harbaugh now,
it looks a little bit better and brighter and more.
And every week,
I guess, has a little bit more pizzazz as we get closer to it.
There's at the same time, really quick. I know we got to go. There's a lot of teams not playing well.
I was just going to get to Wisconsin.
We're talking, yeah.
I was just going to get to Wisconsin.
Wisconsin's not necessarily playing all that well. I didn't actually see the final from last. I went to bed before that game ended. I think.
I don't know. I'll take a look.
It was 14-0 midway through the third quarter.
It was 28-0. You beat Hawaii 28-0.
Exactly. I mean, Wisconsin's not playing well, but on the national. In the national picture, Ole Miss struggled against Vanderbilt last night. There's all kinds of teams that aren't playing well. I'll tell you, the one team I do like, keep your eye on, they could very well be in that playoff come January, is UCLA.
Yes.
I like, or New Year's Eve. Correction, New Year's Eve, which is weird.
Brent and I talk
UCLA.
about that. Brent and I talk about that in our full-length podcast, how just Arizona, everybody kept saying, "Oh, you need to buy Arizona, buy Arizona." It's like, no.
People were buying Arizona State, too.
Well, yeah.
And they just fallen off.
That was after week 1. Arizona lasted a little bit longer, but just the whole year in college football right now. Big Ten.
It's fun.
SEC, like you've got new powers now. You have Ole Miss, Alabama. Who knows what's going to happen with them? Before I let you go, and this is just great talking with you. We're talking with Michael Dixon. He writes for the Daily Nebraskan, student newspaper for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Notre Dame. That's the traditional power.
Hate Notre Dame.
What is going on there? They lose Malik Zaire, and all of a sudden, kaboom. They're still a great football team with their backup. It's like, can we buy into Notre Dame yet? Or is it just like, nope, not yet?
Oh, man.
Because I don't know anymore.
It's like I don't want to buy into Notre Dame, but I can honestly buy into Notre Dame just as much as I can buy into anybody right now.
Mm-hmm. New Michigan.
It's tough to buy into to anybody.
Northwestern.
But Notre Dame, I mean, goodness gracious. And that game against Texas on opening night was one of the more embarrassing. As somebody who grew up a diehard Texas fan, I probably just lost all credibility with anybody listening to this. But as somebody who grew up a diehard Texas fan, I was. There have been few times I was that embarrassed to watch that program play, and I didn't think a whole lot of Notre Dame after that. And then they pull one out in week 2, and I have a little bit more fuel for my anti-Notre Dame fire. But they've turned things. They haven't turned things around, but.
They're salvaging what they've got.
I mean, they look just as good as anybody, and of course they're Notre Dame. So all they have to do is win from week to week, and everyone's ready to declare them the best team in the country. They did that in was it 2011 or 2012 when they played Alabama in the national title game. It was Notre Dame's just as good as anybody, and of course they did not belong.
Exactly.
But because they're Notre Dame, I think I can reluctantly buy into them right now. But I can't buy into many teams at all, really.
Finally, Texas Tech, is that for real? I mean, yeah, they lost, but man, you put up 52 toe-to-toe with TCU. You lose on a miraculous catch by former Husker Aaron Green.
Yeah, you almost beat TCU.
Like, man,
they beat Arkansas last week, and I was ready to declare I was ready to declare that Arkansas after they lost to Toledo the week before. I think, Arkansas is nothing, so I don't really think a whole lot about Texas Tech because I know, UTEP in non-conference. I don't even remember who they played in their first game, but it was who cares you, if you will. And so I'm not thinking a whole lot about Tech, but man, they may not play any defense, but just the Big 12 in general, it's exciting. Those teams are good.
Oh yeah.
I imagine look at Texas and Nebraska right now. Texas is 1-3, Nebraska's 2-2. I would much rather be, I know obviously you've got a better record, but I would much rather be Nebraska having to get through the Big 10 than being Texas having to get through the Big 12 because you look at Texas' schedule, those guys may finish 3-9 this year.
This is going to be the worst Texas record in years.
A long time. This is the first time they've started 1-3 in 60 years. Only the second time Nebraska was 1-2 in 50 years. The programs, it's weird how they're coexisting right now, but it's fascinating too.
Oh yeah, just absolutely remarkable. By the way, Northwestern escaping Ball State 24-19,
but they're still winning.
Yes,
the Wildcats are still winning.
Those Northwestern
That's all that
Wildcats
matters.
Are still there. They're going to get it done. They're having to battle Iowa right now for the Pac-10 West lead.
And I am low key hoping that. I know we said that we have to go here for about 10 minutes, but we're having such a good discussion here. I'm low key hoping that Michigan State survives enough and has enough, impresses the voters enough to get to number 1 before they come to Lincoln. I think it's November 7th. Looking forward. I really hope the Spartans are number 1 when they come to Lincoln. That would be quite fun.
I'll tell you, I don't know if Ohio State's giving that up anytime soon. Those two do have to play each other before Michigan State comes to Nebraska, I think. I'm pretty certain.
We'd have to look at that to confirm that.
I don't know. It might be after that. I don't know. But anyways, Michael Dixon, always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, dude. And good luck to your Cubbies. I'm a bitter baseball fan this year because my team has just been an absolute... They're not even that much of a train wreck. They're only a few games under 500, but it's just been depressing to watch this season unfold the way it has. But thankfully, my Dallas Stars are just about to get started here in a week and a half. Hockey's almost back. Hockey's my thing.
Oh yeah,
and I can drown my sorrows in. Lincoln Stars are back too. Swanee, we should go hit a game.
Yeah, all right. I'm hoping the Cubs. They play Pittsburgh better in Pittsburgh, but they also play the Cardinals better. Like they're better on the road than at home. I don't get it.
I mean, that NL Central is
best division in baseball.
It really it's been one of the best divisions in the history of baseball. It's fun, and to the fact that one of those teams is going to the Cubs or the Cardinals, or the Cubs or the Pirates. The fact that one of those teams is going to lose in that wild card game is brutal. But that's just the way it is, and that's what makes baseball so great. Yeah.
And the division won't be decided till like probably Friday or Saturday or something.
Yeah, and you've got on the flip side in the American League, you've got teams that are just blah 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 blah
Yankees,
blah, and one of them
Astros,
is going to get
Rangers,
into that second
the
wild card.
Royals are meh.
I like the Yankees more than a lot of people do, but I do think the Blue Jays are too good to lose the American League.
I want them to go all the way.
You look at what they may be right there with Kansas City for the best record in the American League, but you look at how good that team has been since the trade deadline when they went out, and you want Toronto to succeed because it's so rare for a team to go all in at the trade deadline and it to work the way it has. But they addressed exactly what they needed, and that is literally the scariest offense I can remember.
And it's new. The Blue Jays are something new, something
it's different.
fresh.
And it's, those Canadian fans, they're wild.
That place is just, oh my gosh.
I cannot wait to see the Rogers Center in October.
That place is always,
those places,
that is just jumping.
And it's exciting.
And
it's just
packed.
exciting for those guys, for those fans. Because, baseball in Canada, they lost their expos and everything. The entire country unite. It's not just a state. Like Nebraska unites around the University of Nebraska. The entire country, when they're good, gets behind the Toronto Blue Jays. It's still too early. It's early enough in the NHL season where those Canadians don't have to care about their hockey, and they can get around these Blue Jays. And I say that you were just born the last time the Blue Jays were what they were. But come on, Blue Jays, do something for us.
Yes, because I tell you, I don't know why. I just love seeing Rogers Center going nuts.
And that place in October is going to be phenomenal.
It's so loud. I've never heard a baseball stadium get that loud before.
And
it's unreal.
They're fantastic baseball fans, too.
Yeah.
They know exactly what they're talking about. They haven't had much to cheer about for 20 years, but now they've got something, and literally the entire country of Canada can get behind it. I think that's awesome.
It's great. Michael Dixon, you're awesome.
You're awesome, dude.
Well, I try. But
bring me in some other time, dude.
Yeah, definitely. Michael Dixon, he's a writer for the student newspaper Daily Nebraskan, also does some great stuff on 90.3 KRNU. And this has been a Husker football podcast here on The Route, Facebook.com/TheRoute2, @the_Route2. We'll see you next week. 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 We'll see you next week.